Welcome to 60 minutes of unscripted .NET entertainment. As doctors of .NET, we prescribe healthy choices in .NET. I'm your host, Cam Soper, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Scott Addy and David Pine. And we would like to welcome today's guest, Gerald. Gerald, I'm sorry, how do you pronounce your last name?
That's always fun. My last name is Versluis, but it's probably hard to pronounce for any other person that's not from the Netherlands. So Versluis is usually how it's pronounced.
I would rather just not pronounce it than mispronounce it.
Perfect.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do.
Yeah, so I'm from the Netherlands, as you might have guessed by now. Currently, I am on the GitHub Codespaces team. So we just shipped our little GA thing. You might have heard of it. And before that, when I joined Microsoft, I was working on the Xamarin Forms team. And actually, I'm also, coincidentally, this wasn't planned before because it's unscripted. I'm going back to the now .NET MAUI team in about a week. So I'll be joining them again. But in my time during working on GitHub Codespaces, I was still, working on a little side project, the Xamarin Community Toolkit. That's what we're going to talk about today mostly. To stay true to my Xamarin kind of roots. So yeah, developer at Microsoft, working remotely from the Netherlands. That's who I am.
Awesome. And I want to take this opportunity. I'm gonna make you go full screen here again. I want to take this opportunity to compliment you on your lighting. That backlighting is really cool, and I really like it.
Yeah, I dabble a little bit with my own YouTube channel where I also, try to do some Xamarin .NET MAUI stuff. So kind of as that grew, it kind of, it started with the, I don't want to offend anyone here, but kind of with a crappy webcam and not great sound. So, it started to turn into a real studio here with a big camera lighting from there. And, it's crazy. I hope my wife isn't watching because I spend way too much money on
this. We won't tell her your secret.
Okay, good.
All right. So, Scott, you want to do a checkup?
Yeah, but before we do that, I have one very important question. You said in the beginning of the show we prescribe healthy choices. You also pointed out you are from Kansas City. Do the healthy choices include Kansas City barbecue?
Oh, absolutely. And I hope my friends around the U.S. or even overseas understand that there is a in-person conference coming up here in Kansas City next month. I'll be speaking at it. And I certainly hope anybody who's viewing will reach out and say hello. I would love to meet you. And, I was just thinking, guys, maybe we should get like some interviews or something like in person to run the show or something like that. We'll talk about it offline.
All right. Yeah. Let's do the checkup.
KCDC?
KCDC. Yeah.
KCDC. Yeah, that's what. Yeah.
ACDC is a completely different thing. Highway to Hell. Etc.
Right. Yeah, I've heard about it. It's supposed to be pretty awesome. So if you're in the neighborhood, definitely go check it out.
Yep. Awesome. Let's do the checkup.
All right. Our checkup for today is actually a blog post that comes to us from one of our cloud advocates, Brandon Minnick. If you're in the Xamarin space, chances are you've heard Brandon's name. And chances are Gerald knows far more about this content than I do. Anyways, here we go. What this blog post is trying to tell us, it was posted about a month ago, is that as many of us know, Xamarin Forms has evolved into what we now call .NET MAUI. In response to that evolution, there's this unification of the existing Xamarin and the existing Windows community toolkits. The new name for this project, this unification, is the .NET MAUI Community Toolkit. And this new toolkit, as is described further down in this blog post, will actually consist of two NuGet packages, the two that are listed here. Those packages have not shipped yet. The pre-release packages are actually targeted for, it looks like, early next month, so September. These new packages will continue to be open source and community supported. If you're curious where these live on GitHub, you can find them at github.com/community toolkit. .NET/Maui.
Wait, so I have a question. So just to clarify, the Maui Community Toolkit is not just the next evolution of the Xamarin Community Toolkit. These are separate community toolkits.
This is a toolkit that will be fully compatible with Maui projects. So instead of targeting .NET Standard 1.0 as the Xamarin Community Toolkit did, the new toolkit will target .NET 6.0.
Okay, that makes
as Maui
sense.
does. It's a great question. There will continue to be backwards compatibility with the Xamarin Community Toolkit, and official documentation for this .NET Community Toolkit will eventually be hosted with everything else out on docs.microsoft.com. A note about the Xamarin Community Toolkit. That will continue to follow the same schedule as Xamarin Forms. Pull requests will continue to be accepted, and service releases will continue to ship through November of next year, 2022. Now, to support migration of apps from Xamarin Forms to .NET Maui, 2 additional packages will be shipped, and that's described further down here. That's these compat packages that you see. So those 2 packages will support your migration from Xamarin Forms to .NET Maui. As I mentioned earlier in the answer to Cam's question, both of these packages will target .NET 6.0 instead of .NET Standard 1.0. The other thing that is described further down in this post, there's a blurb here about the Windows Community Toolkit and what's happening there. In a nutshell, the Windows Community Toolkit and the .NET Maui Community Toolkit will share some code through a new NuGet package or new library called communitytoolkit.common, which again is called out here. Did we share an Akka link for this piece of content in case anyone's interested?
We sure have.
Cool.
It is akka.ms/xam-toolkit-future.
Yeah, much more goodness here, but I've given you just the Cliff's notes for what you would find in this blog post.
That's awesome. And I am super excited to hear more about the Xamarin Community Toolkit and what its future looks like in context of Maui and all the great stuff coming up in .NET 6 in the hallway track. So let's get to it. Gerald.
If only you had someone to explain it to you.
Indeed.
Right, yeah. So actually, I don't know what I'm doing here because you told it all. No, so I think it makes sense to maybe go back a little step, like for people who aren't familiar with the Xamarin Forms and the Xamarin Community Toolkit. So Xamarin Forms has been our offering for cross-platform apps on iOS, Android, UWP. Those were like the main targets, but you could also do Linux. You could do Tizen, so the TVs and the watches and that kind of stuff. I don't know. You could do some other stuff that I forgot as well. macOS, definitely. That has been going great for a good couple of years. And of course, the cross-platform, and we're talking about .NET, so based on C# and .NET, writing everything C#, your backend, your mobile app, just one code base and deploying it to all the platforms that I've just mentioned. And that is really awesome. But now with .NET 6, we're growing more and more back to one.NET, right? So we're going to .NET Maui, which essentially is the same thing, but now it will be a first-class citizen. Xamarin was a separate company, then acquired by Microsoft. So, we kind of want to unify that name as well, which, makes a lot of people sad because there's a lot of stuff there, a lot of feelings there. But that's what's happening. So to make that transition, the team at some point said like, hey, Xamarin Forms 5, that's going to be our last version of Xamarin Forms as we know it. And at that time, there were a couple of experimental features. So a couple of controls and a couple of other concepts that were experimental at the time. And that would leave Xamarin Forms in a weird state, right? So if we would leave it like that, then Xamarin Forms would have experimental features forever and ever, because at some point it would just freeze, the version would be frozen. No further big development would go in there. So it's going to be supported, like it said in the blog post, until November 2022. But it would be weird, and also taking out the experimentals was not really an option, because then suddenly people, still, sure, it's experimental, but people do start using it, become dependent on it, become loving it, and we're suddenly going to take that away from it. That was not a great option too. So that was one of the reasons why we came up with the Xamarin Community Toolkit, which is an initiative that has been kind of tried before years ago by James Montemagno. If you've been watching this space, then you definitely know his name. But that never really took off. I don't think they actually ever shipped a NuGet package. I don't know why. But now we rebooted that thing. And one thing we did is take the experimentals from Xamarin Forms 5, put them in the Xamarin Community Toolkit. So the only thing you had to do is install that NuGet, change a couple of namespaces, and you could use that experimental feature that you have come to love. So that was one of the things. Another thing, is the Xamarin Community Toolkit. So that's personally one of the things that I really love about this project, is that there is a great community behind it, open source, of course. And if you're working with Xamarin, also maybe you know this from UWP or WPF, the chances are that you're working with XAML to model your UI. I'm throwing a lot of stuff out there, so we'll probably break it down in a little bit. But one of the things that you have there is like the converters, if you're working with data binding and MVVM and that kind of stuff. And you probably know how it goes, right? Those converters are just small enough that they will just, you put them in one project, but it's too small to put it in its separate package. So you're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And then for the next project, you're like, but I need it. And you're just going to copy it to the next project, maybe tweak it a little bit, and suddenly you have 2 versions. And, if you do that a couple of times, then you have a lot of versions. So what we're also trying to do is trying to get like those converters, and there's behaviors and effects, and kind of like these common paper cut things that are not inside of the box by Xamarin Forms. We're trying to combine those in our package as well, and together with that also, be a little bit lower threshold project than Xamarin Forms, because that was a big code base, which kind of can be daunting if you are like, a starting open source contributor. So also be a little lower threshold kind of project where people could, dip their toe in the water and see what open source is all about, and get some extra guidance from the team. And that's kind of what we've been doing so far.
We actually did have a question here real quick
Sure.
from a YouTube viewer. They're saying that they're a .NET coder, but they're unfamiliar with Xamarin. So how is it different from .NET Standard?
So that's the beautiful thing, right? I think this will become even more true when it goes into .NET 6 and it becomes .NET MAUI, because it's just .NET. It's just C#, right? It's just you're adding a new target to your project. So you might already have your ASP.NET Core project, your, I don't know, Azure Functions, name all the things. And now you can just say, hey, I want to add this cross-platform app. I'm going to talk about .NET MAUI here, which is going to be a single project. We might dive into a little demo later, and I'll show you. But for .NET MAUI, it's going to be a single project, which can target iOS, Android, UWP, macOS, and you can just write C# code that you're used to. Now, in an ideal world, that would be it. But the years of experience with cross-platform apps has taught me that it's not that simple. It's still very helpful to know a little bit about the platforms that are underneath it. So it's still very recommendable to know about iOS, Android, because soon you're going to run into the quirks of those platforms, that it just works a little bit different. So, it's not as simple, but at least you won't have the pain of learning Objective-C or Java or one of those languages, right? C#, .NET, so that's everything you can use. And there's definitely some things that you need to know about cross-platform or mobile app development. But yeah, it should definitely flatten that learning curve.
Awesome. That's great. I really like how you kind of expressed like the real world scenarios where it's like, it's not just a marketing pitch. Like, this is cross-platform. Everything's in one box and it just works. Like, there are nuances to different platforms that you're targeting. And having that underlying domain knowledge is really helpful. So
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I could tell you that, but then people are going to be disappointed, right? So
Right,
I'd like to have it the other way around, that they're kind of afraid to start, but maybe once they get doing it, then it's like, wow, I'm delighted. This is actually easier than Gerald was telling us. So
We did have one more question in the chat. I wanted to address this. I'll show it on the screen here. Is .NET 6.0 compatible with Xamarin?
I saw that question and I didn't really understand it right off the bat. So maybe if there's a little bit more information there, that would be helpful. So what I see from that same person, I'm a .NET coder. Oh, the same person just asked the other question. Okay, good. So is compatible with Xamarin. Xamarin as a name is going away, and also kind of like the technology together with that. Because if you're going to target .NET 6, that's going to be called .NET MAUI. But if we again back up a little bit, Xamarin is kind of like a container thing for a lot of things, because you have what is now kind of referred to as Xamarin Traditional, which is basically libraries that are wrappers around the actual native APIs, just so to make it possible for you to indeed write C# instead of Objective-C or Java or whatnot. So that's kind of like the translation libraries in between there. That will allow you to write C#, but you will still see a lot of namespaces that definitely fit into the iOS and the Android ecosystem. So that's one thing. And then you still also had to do kind of like that top level UI layer. That still has to be a native thing. So for iOS, that is storyboards. And for Android, I think you have XML files, which is another XML variant where you compose your UI that way. And what Xamarin Forms then did is take that base. So Xamarin Forms is built on top of those libraries, but that will add another abstraction layer, which allows you to also share that UI code. You will not have to do with any of those native namespaces. You will solely use like the .NET namespace and those objects. So that will add another abstraction layer on there, which basically, again, makes you feel more familiar with the solution, will make you feel more of a .NET C# developer than a mobile developer. But still, again, and that's also with .NET MAUI what's going to happen, right? So maybe, okay, one story at a time. So, and what's happening now is with .NET MAUI is basically taking all the learnings of Xamarin Forms, because Xamarin Forms has existed now for 6-7 years. And, they have been, I think that was mentioned like in the context of the blog post, they have been backwards compatible for all those versions basically. And that was a big thing that we wanted to do. But that also meant that we couldn't implement any breaking changes. So every decision that wasn't great in hindsight, we were stuck with that. So, there were at some point performance things, there was, I know, a nice anecdote, fuchsia. I don't know even how you pronounce it properly in English, but you have the weird spelling with the SCH or CHS. There was a typo in that, and if you go look at the Xamarin Forms code right now, then still the one with the typo is still in there. So that's how backwards compatible it is. We just leave the typo in.
The color fuchsia, right?
Oh, fuchsia. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's
okay. Yeah,
exactly. So, and now with .NET MAUI, we kind of have the opportunity to start with a clean slate, right? We're still going to basically everything that you've learned in Xamarin Forms, or everything that you are learning today, is still knowledge that you can use, because there will be a couple of breaking changes in like some property names or some other things. But the big thing that's happening is that it's a completely different architecture with more performance. All the learnings that I just said are taken into account for this whole rewrite. But still, it's kind of backward compatible in the sense that all the XAML and the code that you would write, all the APIs, at least the names and that kind of stuff, is something that you can still use. But everything internally basically is completely different. So that's kind of what's happening. And if you're going to do something with .NET 6, then you're looking for .NET MAUI probably. But the kind of the thing where I wanted to go is like the Xamarin Traditional, so just the wrappers around the native APIs. Those are still there, because without that, .NET MAUI cannot exist. right? Only it will not be branded Xamarin. It will now be, I think, .NET for iOS and .NET for Android, something like that. But also that doesn't really matter, because if you recall from just now, I said that they were using like the namespaces from those platforms anyway. So you would use for iOS, you would use UIKit dot whatever, or Android dot widgets dot whatever. So those namespaces will still be the same. So there is nothing going to change there besides that you're changing the target to .NET 6.
Makes sense. So I can see there, at the in our interface that you have some code up on your screen. Is there anything that you'd like to show us code-wise?
I didn't know where this was going to go, so I just put it up here just in case, basically.
Well, I've been watching the preview actually, because it's been like animating and doing stuff. I'm like, oh,
I know what's going on over there. I want to see it. Here, I'm going to throw it up.
Sure.
What do you have? What are you working on?
I hope I could keep a straight face, because it wasn't working just now. But I got it working while I was talking, so no one noticed. So just to show a little bit of what I've been talking about, I'm gonna look here, and the camera is here because here's my second screen, so it's gonna look a bit weird, but bear with me. So maybe for the project structure, so there's a lot in here, because this is the whole Xamarin Community Toolkit project. So this is the two main things, and the rest is a sample application that you can see running here on the right. And this is kind of the thing which is going to be massively improved with .NET MAUI, because now if you look at like the project structure for a Xamarin Forms application, then this is like your shared library. So this is where you want to have all your code, right? Because this is where your UI lives, and the more code you can get in here, the more it's reusable across all the platforms. But at the time of Xamarin Forms, we kind of stopped there. And we would put like all the actual platform specific stuff in all these targets here. So you can see the Android. We also support F#, GDK, iOS, Tizen, UWP, WPF. The only one missing here is macOS, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's really timely that you're showing UWP and WPF. And I noticed that they both have little icons there calling out that it's probably not supported on the current platform you're developing on. But we did have a viewer ask a specific question. Is there any guidance on migrating from WPF specifically to MAUI?
I don't think so. I think WPF, I could pull it up real quickly as well. So here we go. Just boom, switch over to a browser screen. And whoops. This one.
I was going to say that with this particular question, if there isn't already a migration guide, chances are there's a GitHub issue to track that work.
Yeah, so but the thing I wanted to go first is the actual supported platforms. Let me see if I can quickly pull that up. Roadmap, contribute. I know it's somewhere. Anyway, let's not try to find that right here all the time. So, but I think the kind of officially supported platforms is going to be, of course, iOS, Android, UWP, and macOS. I think that's kind of like the main platforms that is going to be supported. So UWP, we have a backend for that on Xamarin Forms, but we kind of had this weird situation where iOS, Android, and UWP would be supported by Microsoft. So, that was our focus. And then we had, because again, it's open source, we had kind of the backends for Linux, for Tizen, for, well, Linux and GTK is the same thing. And for WPF as well, were kind of donated from the community, which also, our kind of idea with that was that it was also going to be maintained by the community. But, that doesn't really happen in all scenarios. So what is happening is that kind of like the basic version works in WPF, but not everything is implemented. So the way that Xamarin Forms works is in the abstraction layer. So if I go back to a little bit of code here, we can say like, hey, we have a stack layout or we have a label. This is all Xamarin Forms code. And what is going to happen is through the concept of a renderer, we're going to see, hey, okay, you want to show a label on screen. Then, okay, which platform are you running on? Okay, you're running on iOS. Then in this case, we're going to render that label as a iOS.label. It's named differently, but it's going to be rendered to an iOS.label. And we're going to make an instance of that iOS label. And we're going to map all the properties here, the margin and the style and the text. And we're going to map that to the native properties on that platform for you. So you don't have to think about it. That's all the stuff that we do. So what happens if you have WPF is that, some properties are implemented, others are not, because we're going to keep going. We're going to add features, but we as Microsoft are focusing on iOS, Android, and UWP. So, we don't get the time from our boss to actually work on WPF, because that is something that, we made a decision. We took it in from the community. We thank you for it, but we also ask you to then keep it up to date. For Tizen, for example, that is going really, really well. Those people are amazing. As soon as we implemented a big new feature, they would come in and implement that for us as well. So that is really great. I think they support most of the stuff that is in Xamarin Forms today. For WPF, not so much. And where I kind of want to go with this is that I think WPF is not on the official supported platforms list. So even if it will be there for the first version, I don't know what the decision is for that. I don't think there will be official guidance to transform WPF to Dot and Maui, unless we at some point decide that WPF is also going to be an official supported platform. But I think at this time that will be UWP.
That's awesome. That's plenty of detail, and I think it's one of the best answers I've heard. Very, very thorough.
Thank you.
So I'm actually really curious. So it seems as though, since it's open source, and that's it, from the community's perspective, out of curiosity, what's your take on that being like public information? Like you say Microsoft supports UWP and iOS and Android.
Mm-hmm.
But WPF is kind of being de-emphasized, so to speak. So as a consumer of that project, like how would they know? Like, is there up for grabs labels? Is there things that are saying, hey, if you're interested in WPF, and how would people even know about that or discover that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that is also something that we struggled with Xamarin Forms to, if we could make it obvious, like, hey, this is what is implemented for all the platforms, but not for platform XYZ. So this is for you to pick up, right? That would be awesome if we could have that. I think that would already help a lot of people, because what you notice a lot of the times, and that's funny because if we go, I just introduced myself, but if we go a little bit back further, I have been in the community first for a good number of years and working with Xamarin Forms instead of on Xamarin Forms. So, and at some point I decided like, hey, cool, maybe I should contribute something as well. So I started looking into that. It was, like I just said, daunting. There was this big code, and, there are these smart people from Microsoft working on it. So what am I going to tell them? And at some point there was a little community initiative of a couple of people that said like, hey, we want to, fix a couple of those paper cut bugs in Xamarin Forms. And we're going to all do that together. We're going to learn together, and we're going to do that. And that was kind of what helped me over the hump of actually start doing that. So I did. And from there, if you've done it once, then it becomes easier. So I did it a couple of times more. And at some point there was an opening on the team. I applied, and to my own big surprise, here I am. So, that's there too. But what I want to say with that is that I kind of know both sides, right? I've been there from the community side, and then there is this big list of issues. There's this big code base, and then, what can I pick up? I don't know. Maybe the team is already working on this, and I'm going to do duplicate work. So that's also something that I really wanted to try to do when I joined the Xamarin Forms team, to also make those kinds of things more clear for the community. Like, hey, what can you do? What can we do? Try to support them while actually doing it, so that so that I can help them help us, basically. It takes some time investment, but hopefully it will return in some things getting contributed instead of us doing all the work. So for like I said, I've been working now on GitHub Codespaces for a big while, and for more than a year. And now I'm going back, and I don't know what has happened to the .NET MAUI team, how they're organized and how they're doing all the things, and maybe they already have plans for this. Talking about this, it might actually be a really good idea. I know about that one. We have here on the wiki, there is a lot of kind of hidden information here on the wiki. So definitely go through here if there's something that you want to know. And one of them is the .NET MAUI status, where right now, they're kind of like, this is what the status is, what property of what control is implemented for like the major supported platforms. Right, so we should see almost all greens here because we're close to the GA, and that is the case. But what talking about this, I'm really literally making this up right now as we go, is that we might, for the platforms that are kind of like community driven, we might add the columns here for like not UWP, WPF, and all the other things, so that you could at least have some sense of like, hey, what still needs to be implemented. For one, as the consumer, that will make clear like, hey, I'm trying to use this thing and it's not working. You can go to here and you can see if that is expected or not. And the other thing for people who are potentially wanting to contribute, because Hacktober is coming up already, almost around the corner. So you can also see like, hey, we have these issues that or these properties that still need to be implemented. Maybe click here to create an issue right away. So that they're working on it, maybe something like that. But I'm open to ideas. So if you're watching this, please let me know.
Yeah, you said something very important there, especially with Hacktoberfest coming up. I'd like to call attention to the fact that it is preferred to create an issue prior to a pull request so that you can track it and tie it back. It's just being transparent, and it adds that extra layer of like visibility so that the team knows you're working on it, so it's not duplicated efforts and stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. So that is we also with the I'll get back to that in a little bit, but with the Xamarin Community Toolkit, .NET MAUI Community Toolkit, we also have this monthly stand-up now, where we also have our meetings, our kind of progress meetings out in the open. It's on the .NET Foundation YouTube channel, so go check that out. And I said something similar there, David, because we see a lot of people, which I love, that are very enthusiastic and they go coding and they open a PR, and we're like, yeah, I don't know. And that's not great, because I hate telling you like, hey, this work, we don't know if we can accept it because, XYZ. It can be any reason. Maybe we were already working on it. Maybe we already decided not to do it. So, always open an issue. And then it's up to us. It's our responsibility to, respond to that timely, be clear about our expectations and what you can do. But definitely first, start out that conversation, and have that issue. Anything that has to do with the toolkit, and this kind of transcends this project. I think this is more open source in general. Open that issue, start that conversation, and everything you want to do about the project, keep that there within the project in public. Because what I also see is that a lot of people come to me through all kinds of back channels, Twitter DMs, Discord, whatnot, which is great. I love to help each and every one of you, but there's a lot of you and there's just one of me, so it's not going to scale if I have vacation. Or what is a good way to contact you? See, there we go.
Very timely.
So that is again, I would hate to say just don't do that, because I would love to respond to every one of you, but it doesn't scale. And if it has to do with the project, there is a good chance that other people can join in. Other people have maybe better answers than me. So if it has to do with a specific project, don't be, maybe that's it. Maybe that's why people do it. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid of what's going to happen when you start a public issue or a public conversation. As long as you know how you have that respectful, kind of humble thing, where you just say, hey, I'm not sure, but I see this and that. I have this idea. No one's going to, be nasty to you and say, well, we don't like you, closed. We're going to be nice, and other people have the chance to join in as well.
Yeah, there's people on this end as well, so we're empathetic to the cause. Also, I'd like to call attention to the fact that the GitHub UI is actually remarkable. So I've been on many open source repositories where I've been posting an issue, and I'll start typing in like even the title or like the description, and GitHub's like, oh, here's things that we found that are similar to this already. Does this already cover it? It's like, oh, actually, yeah, this issue already exists and it's there and people are discussing it. So it's just a way to kind of vet that we're all thinking alike. There have been several other questions that have come through. I'm going to throw these up here real quick. So they're asking about a planned graphic user interface designer. So I'm imagining back to like WinForms days where you had like all the controls and you can drag and drop things on.
Yep.
Like, is that something that's being planned, or is there a way to like discover componentry and like what's the future of that?
This is always a very hot topic, because I honestly don't know why we're not doing it. I think because it's very complex, and we've tried it with like, you know, also within the WPF kind of era with Microsoft Blend and those kind of tools. And I think because it's XAML, it's very kind of fluid and extensive, and you can have so many things. You know, there has been a good number of issues in like, you know, making it work in Visual Studio alone, so let alone in a designer that can also do the same thing. And then you have the additional problem if you're going to go back to like the cross-platform ecosystem. How is it going to look on a certain platform? You know, it can be anything. iOS is pretty predictable. Android, you know, it can be anything because people have so many flavors of Android alone, so many customization options. So I think it's just a very hard product with a lot of investment that has to go on. So honestly, as far as I know, it's not being planned. I would love to surprise you and say like, boom, suddenly we have it, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. So the other part of the question, how can I know what components are? It's not the same, but it's kind of the name of the show. It's the Microsoft Docs. Because the docs are pretty good, right? You have docs.microsoft.com. Right now, we have the ones for Xamarin Forms. For the first version of .NET MAUI, that's basically going to be a one-on-one copy with changing the namespaces. I'm sorry, David, if you're watching this, the other David who is writing the docs for this, it's not that simple. I know.
But he'll tell you it's not that simple.
I know. But yeah, so, you know, that's basically what's going to happen probably, because everything that is in Xamarin Forms today will be in .NET MAUI, at least for the first version, and we'll start building from there. So, you know, browse through there because it's the documentation. Also, David, you're doing a great job because the documentation is very complete. And you know, I love to go through there and discover new things myself, basically. So yeah, I think that's kind of the way. And you know, IntelliSense is your friend as well. Although, you know, that's a little bit harder to discover out of the blue components and things. But yeah, and other than that, maybe watch video tutorials, YouTube channels. I don't know, something like that.
So you know, the questioner brought up a very good point with the discoverability. So if you're trying to learn a new environment, like I would be, I'm not a UI person, so I can anything Xamarin is learning for me. If you're trying to learn a new, you know, development technique or whatever, and you don't know what you know, what your vocabulary is for solving the problems, what tools you have that you can, you know, be creative with, it is kind of a hard thing to do. So I just like to throw in sample code. Look at sample code. If you see an app out there that well, not just sample code, but any open source project, if you see an app out there that does something that you like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with stealing it. That's the name of the game.
Borrowing. No, but absolutely. That's also like, and that also I think helps for like, you know, the barrier to start contributing. That's exactly what I did at some point, because there is great stuff on GitHub that may or may not have a accompanying blog post. You know, sometimes they don't, because there are good developers out there who don't like to be out here doing video or writing blogs or whatever. They just want to write awesome stuff. But still, it's open source. So at some point, that's what I did as well. Again, James Montemagno, and I think David Ortnow, now the PM for a whole bunch of Xamarin and .NET MAUI stuff, he's been creating some sample apps just to, you know, kind of dog food what's going on, the new development here. And what I did at some point is go to those applications for, I think my initial reason was to look at like, hey, I like what they're doing in this app or this demo app. How can I borrow that? And, you know, then you discover that those people solve issues kind of like the same way you do. They're just regular developers. Like, they also make this little hack there just because, else it won't work. And if you just suddenly see that, then you have the realization, so, okay, maybe, I shouldn't be so scared to do contributions and just do it.
Yeah, and our viewers have rightfully reminded me, my problematic terminology aside, no, always adhere to open source licenses, folks. I'm not saying blow past the license by any means. And Fuel Snable brings up an excellent point. Just because it doesn't have a license doesn't mean it's public domain. So do keep that in mind too.
Cam said steal all the code.
Yeah, I'll be looking for my pink slip from.
The takeaway there is Cam said that, not Scott or David or Gerald. Cam.
Oh, that's funny.
Actually, I'm about to find out. I'm just really improvising here, and you cannot see this, so it's kind of like, you have to trust me. The one thing that I reminded during talking about it is that we don't have a graphical designer. I was trying to pull up like the toolbox in Visual Studio, hoping that at least that will give me a list of all the things that are in there. I thought it would, but it doesn't. So that doesn't help you as well. Sorry.
Well, I think we had started on your screen sharing probably 30 minutes ago, and you started showing us something, and then we just got so distracted with questions and improvising and stuff like that.
No
so
worries.
Let's focus on this for a minute.
Yeah. So, and there was one that I wanted to quickly go into. I can do it real quick. Hopefully, I saw a question, someone asking about Linux support. That also is not planned. Excuse me. I don't know why. Again, I don't know what the reasoning is for that. But I see. I think a lot of people asking for that. So please go see. If I can find the link, I will tweet it out. So be sure to follow me. But one of the things that we do is we make decisions based on data, right? So if there is a kind of hidden group of people that would really like to see Linux support, that we have, I think we have an issue or something for that. Just leave some emoji or whatever on there, so that we can gauge kind of we want this, and there are thousands, million, gazillion people that want that, then of course we are forced to add that Linux backend. So I will find however you want to, you have to make us know that, and I will tweet that out. But yeah, then definitely, do that.
Before we move on to the next question, so if I'm a Linux developer, and I'm looking, I think it's Scott and David to help me with this one. So if I'm a Linux developer and I need a desktop app. So my option, probably my best .NET option there is like a Blazor app is Electron still what we do? Is Electron still a thing? Or have we moved on from Electron?
Next question. No,
There was an initiative Steve Sanderson was working on to sort of marry up Blazor with Electron. I'm not sure of the current state of that, but it was a thing at one point. I'll emphasize that it was experimental.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next question then.
Yeah, they're asking about Maui Blazor and if there would still be, once that's out, if there'll be a need for mobile Blazor bindings.
Great question. So those are two different things. I am fully aware that we're, again, totally ignoring the code that's on screen here, but that doesn't matter. I could wrap that up in 10 minutes. Who wants to know about the Community Toolkit anyway? So the Maui Blazor and the mobile Blazor bindings are kind of two separate things, because the mobile Blazor bindings, I think that is still an experimental thing. Let me see if I can... wrong screen again. Blazor mobile bindings, which is kind of like, see, experimental. Yeah, there's even docs for this. See, my goodness, this is amazing. So there we go. And this kind of brings the Blazor programming model to the cross-platform app world. So you could see this more as a alternative to XAML or C# code, where you can write your more kind of Blazor syntax. Well, it still is XAML, as you can see. It's not like the HTML things. You can still use the stack layout and the label, but you can also make your little code block in here. But what this does, it will still, as you can see here, translate it to the native look and feel, just like Xamarin Forms does. It translates everything for you to however it should look on the native platform. But you get all the you get the Razor files, you can mix all that, you can get the dependency injection here. So you get all the goodness from Blazor and how you can write your code there, but it will still be translated into the native UI. Whereas, the other thing, how do they call it? Maui Blazor. So we also now have I don't think there's a lot of docs for that, but a thing called the Blazor web view. Not this one. Yeah, see, there's not a lot of things in here yet. But that's a component in .NET MAUI. You have the kind of regular web view where you could just load any web page, any URL. And now we have the Blazor web view, which is a control very specific to Blazor. What's in the name. So there you can basically take all your Blazor files, put that in your .NET MAUI project. You just have to point hey, which HTML file do I need to use? And you have to point it to the selector in that HTML page where your Blazor app is going to be loaded in. And then you can just use that Blazor app in your .NET MAUI app. And that will also have that HTML look and feel. You will write HTML, you will write CSS and C#. But so then you're kind of creating a hybrid app. With which you can still, have a little bit easier access to all the sensors, like your GPS and your camera and whatnot. But then you're building more like a hybrid app like that. So although it both says Blazor, it's two different things. Naming is hard. That's basically what it comes down to. Just like the hot restart and the hot reload and the .NET hot reload, naming is hard.
We should just start calling it making the thing do the thing.
Exactly. You can never go wrong with that.
And I think that statement extends to naming people too, which is why there are so many Scotts and Davids. I wanted to ask a question, something that has been burning in my mind. So I'm looking at this new community toolkit, and I'm assuming there are some widgets or controls included with this toolkit.
Yes.
That then leads me to believe that there's probably some overlap here between what this toolkit brings and what some of the control vendors are doing. So how would you, Telerik, for an example, with their .NET MAUI offering, how would you make the decision to use one or the other? Because I assume there is overlap.
Oh, that's a really good question. That's one I don't get often. I actually have to think now. Okay. No, so with the Xamarin Community Toolkit, so basically to recap also what we started the show with is we're going to have basically 3 toolkits in, a couple of weeks now. The Xamarin Community Toolkit as it is, that can work with Xamarin Forms as it is today. Xamarin Forms will get stability and service updates until November 2022. We are kind of following the same path. We're going to freeze kind of like the big feature development in a little while, and also support with bug fixes and that kind of stuff until November 2022. You can use those packages together and you will be happy. So what .NET MAUI did is also introduce kind of like a compat layer, compat package, whatever you want to call it. Because like I said earlier, the whole kind of architecture changed. Like the outside APIs are still the same, but the whole architecture changed. But what the team did is they introduced a compatibility layer. So you can still use all your custom renderers, which is a thing inside of Xamarin Forms whenever you decided like, hey, the renderers that the team wrote is awesome, but I have this property that I know is available on the platform, but is not available in the abstraction layer that Xamarin Forms is. You could hook into that with a custom renderer, and you could enable that functionality yourself. So you can imagine that a lot of people have these custom renderers, and suddenly they are useless because we have a new architecture now. So what the team did is they introduced a compat layer where you can still use those renderers. So you basically don't have to change anything except for the namespaces. Again, that's a little bit maybe too crude, but it's supposed to work that way mostly, with minor changes at least. So you can make the transition from your Xamarin Forms to .NET MAUI really quickly. And that is, we're going to create a package next to this, which is kind of like the Xamarin.Community Toolkit.compat also. I don't know if that's the name we chose, something like that. But that will follow that same pattern. So we will keep all the renderers, all the code as it is today. So basically we have the same version, but this one is now compatible for .NET MAUI. Because that was a question that I got at some point, like, hey, what are you going to do with the community toolkit whenever .NET MAUI is coming? And I said, I don't know. We'll see about that. People still like it or find it useful then we're going to do it. But that's not the way the world works. Because, the community toolkit, people have started loving it. And now they want to switch to .NET MAUI. They're using the controls because there's some pretty amazing stuff in here. And now they want to move to .NET MAUI. And suddenly we are the blocking factor because we don't have support for .NET MAUI. So, they can't switch because they're using the camera view or the expander or some of the other stuff. So we had to come up with a story there. So we're going to have kind of like an intermediate package, which uses that compat layer. So you can use that for the easy transition, which will not give you all the benefits of .NET MAUI, but you can at least, skip over really quickly. And then we're going to build on a .NET MAUI native version, if you will. And that will leverage the new architecture. And together with that, we're also, the Windows Community Toolkit is kind of like the same initiative, but now specific to UWP, and it has been around for years, so we can really use their experience. And we definitely have overlap with that. So they already have also all the converters because they are using XAML as well. So they have a bunch of converters. They also have controls. They have their own MVVM toolkit now. So we really have to see like where we have that overlap, and we're going to mix and match like what they have and put things in a common package and share some code. And it's going to be really awesome. But that will definitely not one-on-one have all the things that are in the Xamarin Community Toolkit right now. Going back to your question, when to choose something from Telerik or not, I think the overlap is not that big yet, actually. I don't know from the top of my head what is all in Telerik and Syncfusion and the other ones that are out there.
Well, I was just going to add that I think there's a lot of stuff like charts and gauges, barcodes, pop-ups. Yeah. There's a lot of things that are kind of beyond the scope of what I would imagine the toolkit. And looking at the toolkit, you mentioned like behaviors and converters and layout things, right? Stuff like that makes certain tasks that are common easier. So I don't know if there's really a ton of.
We have a good number, like the avatar view to make it a little bit easier to show a little bit of the avatars with like the initials, or a camera view. That's also there we go. So a camera view that will just pop up a camera and you can take a picture or do some other stuff. A drawing view, which is also always good, right? If you want to do a signature or some other stuff. So we have a good number of things in here. Media element to play some videos. But to be honest, it seems that this is not like I said, David. There's a lot of charts and bars and things with PDFs and more like maybe enterprise features, I would say. And this is more, I don't know, maybe more customer focused, if that makes sense. So there's not that much overlap. But I've been on the stream with Sam Basu. I'm sorry if I pronounced that correctly. He's from Telerik. He was doing a lot of awesome stuff. And I've been talking with some people from Syncfusion. So, we're all friends. And in terms of when to choose what, choose whatever supports your case, right? Do whatever has the features for you, wherever you have the most confidence that it will still exist in 5 years. Also, this is free. This is backed by Microsoft. The other things might have, some costs. There's all things to consider, but just choose whatever makes sense for you.
So I need to clarify. I need you to clarify something for me, actually. And several of our viewers, because there was some chat earlier. We keep mentioning, and even up on the screen right here, that the Community Toolkit demonstrates common developer tasks for building iOS, Android, and UWP apps. A lot of folks seem to be kind of confused about that UWP part, though, because there were a couple of comments that they thought it was just WinUI and not UWP. So I was wondering if you could clarify that for everyone.
That's probably my fault. So it's definitely going to be WinUI 3. And to be very, very honest, I still don't even know how that all ties together. So maybe one of you does.
Okay.
But
Okay.
the UWP was kind of like the target for Xamarin Forms. And I think, WinUI is going to be kind of like, it was Project Reunion, right? That kind of initiative where we are trying to combine all the things to bring like the Windows development back to one target as well, which will definitely also be UWP, but that will definitely be target hinged on WinUI 3.
Okay, that makes sense. Basically, in this context, the UWP should mean basically Windows is what we should take from this.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah.
Right.
So I'm going to cast my line out here and try and reel all of us back in. We've got this lovely demo in front of us. Is there anything we wanted to show the audience in the 6 minutes we have remaining?
So, like I said, I put this up mainly because I didn't know where this conversation was going to go. And to be honest, it went pretty some ways that I didn't expect, which is really nice. So yeah, I don't really have a demo prepared other than, this is kind of like the project that we have. So we have the Xamarin Community Toolkit with, we hope to have a clear structure in here with all kinds of converters. So I could go into what that is exactly, but you can see there's a lot. This is definitely a concept that you will use whenever you're working with XAML. We definitely, so that's what I have here on the screen, a good couple of controls as well. And that's what the really cool thing where the community things also comes in, because there's a lot of cool controls out there with a repository here and there. But we actually have on like the core team, we have 3 people, including me, from the Microsoft side, and 2 people right now. We might change that from the community side. So they are actually library maintainers, one from Brazil and one, he lives in Germany, but I think he's from Ukraine originally. And they've been doing wonderful work. And especially Andre has maintained a couple of libraries that he kind of donated to us. So, we can lighten the burden for those people who are maintaining those libraries. We can put them under our package. That makes it easier for people to actually consume it, because now it's suddenly a kind of Microsoft-backed library. And, he is not the only one that has to maintain it and has to face this big list of issues. There are multiple people who can look into it now. So that's kind of what we're trying to do as well. And where was I going with this? So yeah, so this is kind of like, and we also have the C# markup. So this is also something that was in Xamarin Forms, and this is basically an alternative way to write C# code in some kind of a fluent way to design your UI if you don't like XAML and you'd rather do it in code. Also, Brandon Minnick, who has mentioned earlier, he's a big fan of that, so he will make sure that this keeps this stays alive. And here we have like all the sample projects. So this is kind of the shared thing, and this is the thing that you see running here. So we try to have, for every feature and everything that's implemented in our community toolkit, we try to have a page and a little section here in our app. So that for one, because we are lacking a little bit behind with the documentation, because it's all community work. So we are lacking a little bit behind with that, but what we can do is provide you with a sample so you can see what is in there and how to use it. So, for all the things, if you make that sample app run, you can see all the behaviors, all the converters, the effects and whatnot. You can see them all in here, how they behave at runtime, but also, in here in code, how to actually use that from XAML or code or whatnot. So yeah, like I said, if you just then go in here and the views, the camera view, well, it might work on Android because they have this kind of virtual camera thing, I think, where they kind of mimic a camera. Doesn't seem to work. Oh, there we go. Something is coming up. I think we get into kind of a 3D view. It's not very fast for some reason. Well, let's just skip over this one. If you run it, then you will see a little camera preview here.
Does it virtualize your actual camera? I mean,
you could. But if you don't, then you will see kind of like a 3D kind of game space almost, where you can walk around with the right key press, and you can mimic that you're creating images. And I think, oh yeah, there we go. I thought it was breaking my whole emulator, but it's very slow for some reason. So sorry about that. And this kind of has, so some of these were experimental in Xamarin Forms, and hopefully, we can mature them enough that we can bring them back to .NET MAUI as a first-class citizen. Because, for example, the media element. So here we should say James Montemagno with the Xamarin Show. And this is something that if we're being honest, this should be in the box for .NET MAUI, because what modern application does not play a video, right? So this is something that lives with us right now. We are developing on it. We are iterating on it. We hope to have it, matured by the time .NET MAUI comes. Then hopefully, with our experience there, we can just take that and put it into .NET MAUI. And that's also something like that we have to figure out, like with the new .NET MAUI toolkit, because it doesn't make sense to have it in the toolkit as well as .NET MAUI both. I hear James now in one ear. That's kind of, I love you, James, but that's annoying. So that's kind of the things that we have to think about. There's lots of things to consider here, but yeah. So I think we're already going over time, but this is a lovely library. Go over to, we will probably share some links. We have the repository. This is the new one, so github.com Community Toolkit /MAUI. This is also where the new Windows toolkit is going to live. We are going through some renaming stuff right now. And here we have the current one, Xamarin /Xamarin Community Toolkit, where all the stuff is happening now. You can see we can still use some help with a couple of issues, some pull requests. So just join us, let us know what you think, and check it out. And if you have any questions, reach out to me publicly. No, I'm. You can reach me any way you can. I keep an eye on most things, so definitely do that.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you, Gerald, for joining us. And I want to thank everyone who tuned in to watch the .NET Docs show. Please check out our show recordings, our upcoming topics, and more, including our nifty little thumbnails of all our guests that we take before every show at .NETDocs.dev. And tune in next week when our guest is going to be Eagle Hansen, who is going to be talking about Blazor component testing with BUnit. Sounds like a good time will be had by all. So this is Cam and Scott and Dave saying until next time, it's good to see you.
Bye, friends.
Bye-bye. Thanks for having me.